The galaxy burns. The heretic falls. And the Emperor protects. Welcome, Imperial citizens, to The Emperor Protects. I am here hanging out with my good friend Dan. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great, my friend. How are you?
I am well. It's been a crazy summer. That's okay for everyone involved, but we're back at it. And today we are covering truly one of my favorite books, one of the ones that made me just really, really fall in love with the Horus Heresy because of the characters involved. And that is The First Heretic. And this one was actually written by ADB, Aaron Dembski Bowden, a very prolific Games Workshop author. And while I'm queuing up our notes and stuff like that for the show entry, are you a fan of Aaron Dembski Bowden? Give me your thoughts.
Very much so. This book just hooked me on him. The way he writes, the style, the fact that he does a lot of time shifting during the story. I just love that because it makes you kind of retrospective as you're reading forward, story forward. And I love the way, and he does that in all his books.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love the way that he does character development. And now a lot of the good authors do that, but he's one of the best for sure.
I agree. I think his particular strong point for me is his ability to edit out words, which doesn't sound like the strength of an author, but it absolutely is. My wife's actually a full-time author, and it's a skill. Because I don't know if you know this, Dan, he actually wrote the short stories that are in the Slaves to Darkness battle tome. And as far as I know, that's the bulk of the fantasy work that he's done. Sorry, I just dropped my phone.
I didn't know that. I was
and they're incredible because in a single page they give you, not necessarily a detailed story with character progression, but a vibe that no other battle tome I think delivers on. So I've always loved it. So today, obviously, we're talking about First Heretic. This is going to have a lot to do with the word bearers as well as the custodes, the Emperor's right-hand people. Yep. And our books and sources, that's usually the segment here. Again, just like before, when we get into broader topics, we'll bring up a list of sources, but we're covering a specific novel. So First Heretic, Aaron Dembski Bowden. And there's so much to unpack here.
This is a story about, I think this really, for the first time, gives people a chance to see a very dark side of the Emperor.
Yes.
And I think that's really, really important if you're going to look at the overall story that's woven through the Heresy and into 40K, because he literally shames a legion here. And if this is, I'm going to talk about it, a little bit later, but he's just an idiot. Not only does he shame a legion, but he plants the seeds of a horrible feud between two powerful groups of Space Marines.
Yep.
And he really forces the word bearers to go off on something we're going to talk about called the pilgrimage and really discover. I mean, this is the full-blown discovery, for readers as well as for the characters, the world of the Chaos Gods and Demons.
Yeah.
We just see it full-blown, The heresy is birthed in this book.
Yes.
There's no question.
I definitely look at the first three books that we talked about as the how of the start of the heresy. This very cunning maneuver by Horus to have, loyalists spread abroad and then annihilate basically 2 to 3 legions. I mean, salamanders and iron hands never fully recover to legion strength.
Neither did the Raven Guard.
Raven Guard, yes, that was.
There's an interesting. Speaking of which, there's an interesting short story about what's going on back on their home planet.
Yep.
And that there's actually a human, like a regular soldier who Corax kind of left in charge, who literally breaks the rules to come and save the Legion from the... I never knew this happened.
Mm-hmm.
But he literally is the one who saved the Legion, what was left of it, on Istvan 5.
Yep.
But you're right. I mean, this is 3 legions that are just done in terms of their contribution. And
No,
Ugh.
yeah. And I think that's the how of the start, but this is the why, because it goes back before those events.
Hmm.
And we get to see
Yes.
there's this a lot of dialogue in the first three books about how like we had this great dream and Horus threw it all away, and it's like, but it wasn't great for everybody.
Hmm.
And it was really actually quite ugly under the surface, as you mentioned with the Emperor, and it's like it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And I love it. So let's get into this sucker before I
So
start waxing
the
poetically.
thing I want to talk about before we talk about the story is, and again, Aaron does just such a great job with this. This book is about tone. It
Yes.
really is, because right out the gate, the Ultramarines are portrayed as soulless minions. I mean, they're almost servitor,
Yep.
type people. They're following orders to the letter. They don't care. The word bearers, by contrast, are portrayed as compassionate, sympathetic, aggrieved, which they have a damn good reason for that. And so this book is, you can argue, I think, in some ways, that this is really actually the first book you should read when you think about it, because the timelines are always so bizarre in the Heresy series.
Yeah.
And this book is almost like a overarching piece to the other three, because the other three are almost like sub stories or subtitles within this book.
Yeah.
They're all kind of happening in the background while this is going on. But I think that tone is so important. We're going to point out some specific things, and it's just, I can see why, after listening to this book again, I've read it how many times, why the word bearers are your favorite legion. I understand that, even in the 40th millennium, 41st millennium.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, all right. So let's
Yeah.
start what we do is, again, here's a good example of where he kind of starts out either in the past or the present.
Mm-hmm.
So he's starting out in the past, and we're starting out on the planet. It starts out on the planet 4710, which is 47th Expeditionary Fleet, 10th planet, put into compliance.
Yep.
And I'm going to kind of call this section for us the shaming of a legion. But as the story begins, we're taken back many years, like decades, to the planet Colchis, which is the homeworld of the word bearers. And we see a warrior in gray. He's arrived at a home of a young boy and his family, and he's taking the young boy to become an angel, as they see them. And the boy's name is Argel Tal. Do not, listeners, forget that name. You will hear it many times.
Yes.
But the most interesting thing here, the mother asked the warrior his name, and the individual who came to get Argel Tal is Erebus,
Mm-hmm.
who is the chaplain of the word bearers. And that is like, boom. If you know the stories already, we've mentioned Erebus before, you're going, oh my gosh, right? And so now he takes you back into the present.
Yep.
He drops this little thing, and then boom, here we are. And we're on the planet 4710. It's also known as Core. And it was placed into compliance by the 17th Legion, which is the word bearers, many years before. I think it's like 30 or 40 years before, 60 years, something like that.
I think it was like that. It was 40-year gaps here and there.
And the word bearers believe that the Emperor of Mankind, beloved by all, if you ask the custodians, to be a god. They're worshiping him as God. So every world they put into compliance, the people worship him as a god. And they're incredibly loyal. That's one thing you can say about all the word bearers compliance planets. They're incredibly loyal to the Emperor and the Imperium. And we're taken to a specific city on the planet called Monarchia, which is probably the most beautiful city on the planet. And we're shown that the people in the city are watching all of a sudden these stars rain down from the sky. And they believe that the angels have returned to them, and the angels are the bearers of the word. These are their space marines. They've come, and they're so excited that their angels have come back. But as they watch, these stars turn into gunships, and the colors are weird. The colors are blue and with gold trim, and they're going, what is this? This isn't the gray that we expected. And as the angels, quote, exit from the gunships, they're clad in the same colors, that blue and gold.
Yep.
They very coldly, like I said, almost servitor voice, state that they're from the 13th Legion, which is the Ultramarines, and that all the rest, I mean, they don't even explain anything. They just say, look, you have got 6 days to evacuate your city. I mean, imagine that, Doug. These Space Marines get out of this, and they're not even your Space Marines. They're as they call them, they're false angels.
Yeah.
And hey, leave your city. Like, what? You know?
I don't. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to imagine like what their perspective is, because all the things look right. Like the Thunderhawks coming down, the Angels come visiting. They have similar armor, all these kinds of deals, and then you see them, and they're just like, I don't like the cut of your jib, and you know, the jib is Reboot Gilliman, the 17th Primarch,
and.
Or 13th,
and the other thing they add is that on the 7th day, your leaders will be allowed to send a single distress call. And they're like, well, what happens on the 7th day? And they don't answer their questions. You know, they're just like, get out of the city. And thousands of people are killed because they don't want to live. This is their home. This is where they live their whole life. They've done nothing wrong. And of course, the resistance is crushed within hours. I mean, there's,
of course,
you know, no way you're going to fight Space Marines. But millions literally leave their lives behind. And what are they going to? Like, there's nothing outside of the city on this planet. And we are also, very importantly in this part of the story, introduced to what we're going to call a companion, a young lady. Her name is Cyrene Valantian.
Yep.
And we kind of see the events of the first 6 days through her eyes. We're hearing a lot of her perspective on what's going on. And she's actually the first one to call these Ultramarines false angels, because she sees their colors and so forth. Tone is so important here about the way these Marines talk to her and talk to others. It's like, citizen, you must evacuate. You have 3 days. It's like,
yes.
Okay. And then on the 7th day, Cyrene, of course, has evacuated like everyone else. She's standing in the hills overlooking the city, and she's looking back to see what's going to happen. I mean, this is kind of like the, Lot? You know, when God told him not to turn around in the Bible and look back at Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, she looks, and the sky gets very bright, like really, really bright. And... So, what do you think so far?
I think it was probably one of the best introductions, because the planet, or at least the city, right, of Monarchia, which represents a lot of the life and hustle and bustle on the planet. It is a place that is depicted as being very colorful because they are a worshipful people. The Ultramarines were sent here to basically crush religious belief. So when they come down, they're like, oh, we see our angel stuff. And the Space Marines are all cold and like efficient. And they don't, you know, the word bearers would have reacted differently coming in there and be like, oh, hey, my brothers in whatever we're calling our belief system, you know, like, and just kind of been friendly. But that coldness was very, very much felt. And then... You know, I guess nice of them to give them a week, but man, like, the amount of like, it would be honestly like asking America to be like, hey guys, just go ahead and stop using electricity, right? Because these guys have to move outside of the only like hab zone on the planet for a bit.
True.
So it's like, this is ridiculous. An entire planet became refugees, but also still trapped, and so. It's kind of an interesting situation they got. And then, I mean, but you mentioned like Lot's wife from the Bible, and I think that's very on point, because the scale of this kind of destruction they haven't seen since the first word bearers came, and they came not peacefully, of course, but not nearly as aggressive as, you know, dooming the whole city.
No.
But regardless, the destruction looks biblical is what I'm trying to get at. So as you have an entire people that are now persecuted for their beliefs, they see a biblical level catastrophe happen to their home, like, it doesn't solve the problem of them believing in the supernatural. Like all you're doing is just feeding the fire.
Right.
And
this gets to the stupidity of the Emperor for thinking
yes,
he's going to do anything.
Cool
Right,
plan.
Yeah, we get great bonehead. Yeah, and one of the things I think is interesting about Cyrene, and it talks to her character, is right out the gate she asks the question why. She says the word why like 100 times. Like, why are you doing this?
Right.
Why do you why? And and it's a great question because they tell them nothing.
Yep.
They have no idea. They've done everything they've been asked to do, and it's not enough. So we talked about the sky growing bright. She literally, her eyes are burnt out. Her retinas are just destroyed from this. She is blinded, we think permanently, at least at this point, by the light. And then the story switches. And we go to the outer reaches of the system that contains planet 4710.
Yep.
And just a few at first, and then hundreds, and then literally thousands of spaceships just come into. They're just going like full blast bore. They've been going through the warp. They probably lost ships. There's an entire fleet that has arrived at 4710 now, and it is the word bearers. This is their planet. These are their people. And right away you get this feeling of that tone difference where these Marines want to know what happened to their people.
Yeah.
You know, it's just so obvious. And we meet several characters.
Yeah, this is a big meet and greet section.
It's huge. So you meet Argel Tal, as he's now a chapter master, as we call them in the old legions. And he's one. Zaphon is the chaplain.
Yep.
And in Argel Tal, each chapter has a name. His chapter is the Serrated Sons, and Zaphon is the chaplain for his chapter.
Yep.
And Torgal, we meet him. He's another space marine. We meet Daggertal. We meet Malnor. You'll hear these names again. And of course, we meet Lorgar.
Yep.
We meet Erebus again, all these years later. And we meet Corferon, who is it's a very troubled, I think, dysfunctional relationship between Lorgar and Corferon, who is like his adopted father.
Yes.
And if you read the Primarch book, it is such an emotionally abusive relationship.
Yes.
And it's just so tragic that Corferon gets away with this. You know.
Well, and I think it's a huge thing to touch on. I'm going to make it really quick because it's a small note here, but like
sure.
A lot of the Primarchs, when they landed on planets, either fended for themselves and gained reputation, like Conrad Kurz or Lehman Russ, whatever. Some of them were used. So, like, honestly, I feel like most of them were put to work by people, whether it's, you know, the Death Guard guy being able to create new kinds of weapons or, all kinds of stuff. We definitely don't see a lot of them that are manipulated because they tend to be too cunning, but we have a very emotional manipulation setup here. And so it's like, that's kind of a unique thing about Lorgar. It's not like, you know, badass. You're not going to cue a metal riff to it, but it's but it's meaningful.
You use the word emotional. I think that's a perfect word to use for Lorgar. And like you said, that's so out of character. I don't think we've really ever met any other Primarch who is as emotional as Lorgar. Now, you could argue, you know, Lehman Roos, but that's ferocity. That's not emotion. And Lorgar, yeah, he's a very emotional person.
Yeah. I'm going to say...
played on that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I would say probably a loyalist version is the Raven Guard.
Corax.
Corax, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, go on. That was my little interjection.
So, you know, as you're listening, listeners, you might want to write down those names I just mentioned because, again, you'll hear them again regularly during the story. So they get here, and the entire 17th Legion, we're talking 100,000 Space Marines. Just think of the logistics of that. And their Primarch come down to the surface to see what has happened. And after Lorgar arrives and see what's going on, the Primarch of the 13th Legion, Guilliman, he arrives, and Malcador, the Sigillite, arrives, who is the Emperor's right-hand man, a very powerful psyker, kind of a wise person in terms of his personality. He always tries to speak softly and make a point kind of thing. Well, he's talking to Lorgar and trying to explain what's happening. Lorgar he like literally just backhands Malcador and knocks him like 50 feet along the ground. And you're going, oh my, he just smacked around the Emperor's like regent. and to make it worse, Guilliman, of course, makes some smarmy comment, and Lorgar just punches his brother in the face.
Good.
And it's like, yes, absolutely. He does. And this is the tone thing, Doug, where you even listening to Guilliman, the way he speaks to Lorgar, you're like, I'm glad you punched his butt, you know? And so Lorgar is just confused because he doesn't understand what Malcador is saying, because he even asked him, you know, what does my father think? And Malcador told him, he says, your father knows what happened here. He understands. He's the reason we did this. And Lorgar is like, what? Like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
You know, and so Malcador kind of recovers and stands up, and he looks up into the sky, and he basically says, he's not listening to me. He doesn't want to hear what I have to say. And all of a sudden, this huge, of course, golden light appears.
Yes.
Boom. And the Emperor appears. And do you want to talk about what happens next once the Emperor, because this is so just, it's so horrific, really.
So one thing I wanted to touch on here is that, like, if he was there aboard the ship, why did he send Malcador? And I don't like that. It's just, again, it's more distancing himself from Lorgar. But so he does come down and explains to him, like, you're a moron. You missed the whole point of the Imperial Truth. It basically, you know, gives him the plot, I think, in a rather snide and condescending way.
Yes.
And then makes the entire legion, so an entire legion of, like, what is it, 100,000 Space Marines?
Yes.
Line up in rank, and they all have to bend down and kneel in the ashes of what was essentially their great work of worship to the Emperor. And they are essentially shamed. Every single one of them has to kneel, including Lorgar, every piece of leadership, everything. Everybody has to bend knee to not just the Emperor, but also their own shame. Like, that was the point. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't for a lack of reverence to the Emperor. It was, it was regarding the city's construction and its purpose and stuff like that. And around them are all the Ultramarines standing there with their bolters all out. So it's just a very degrading situation for them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, you know, in that moment, the Emperor created the animosity and the feud, the blood feud, really, between the Ultramarines and the Word Bearers here in that moment.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, yeah.
The consequences of which we're going to talk about soon.
Yes, are my favorite book. We can talk about that towards the end, yeah.
Just millions and millions of people killed because the Emperor's an idiot.
Yeah, well, and I understand, like, having a legion come in and do the destruction, but, like, you pit them as enemies when you have them surround one another, or, you know, like, there was a lot of ways to do it that didn't require one legion be subjugated to another.
Why could he have not? We know, you know, Doug, as we read further into the book, why, but why could the Emperor not have explained to Lorgar and had him do it? As hard as that would have been, if he would have explained to Lorgar and answered questions, Lorgar would have done it, perhaps hesitantly, but he would have done it, you know?
Yeah.
And like you said, it would have avoided that issue of the conflict between two Space Marine legions.
I mean, I think it's the same mistake that a lot of the fathers of the Primarchs did, which is that the Emperor treated him like a tool. and Lorgar is a person. You need to talk to a person. You need to instruct a tool. So it's like,
yes.
he just didn't. He's not getting that Dad of the Year mug. So
No, not at all. And even worse, to make it just pound them into the sand, he assigns 20 of his custodians, kind of his watchdogs, to monitor the 17th Legion.
Yep.
And these guys are going to be permanently assigned for the next 50 years, I think they said, to the word bearers to make sure they're doing what they've been asked to do, which is, force worlds into compliance faster. Yep. And make sure that they're not worshiping me. But 20 custodians just to overwatch. That's all they are, is overseers, basically.
Yes, and they're not just tattletales. Like, custodians have their own level of authority that exceeds... I mean, they can probably go toe-to-toe in terms of, like, giving authority and commands as Logar, but it completely breaks up company structure to have, your captain give you an order and then a custodian standing there saying something else.
Right.
It just messes with... It just is a huge cog. It's like... like if you're at work and your boss is on vacation, that first day they come back and you just feel like you're being watched under a microscope. And you're like, why are you here? Everything was great before you came back.
Sure.
That's my take on it. That's my take on Space Marines.
That's a great way to look at it, for sure. So all those things, the Legion is absolutely shamed. Lorgar's beliefs are absolutely shattered, because the Emperor says to him specifically, I am not a god, do not worship me. And this is Lorgar's thing. Yeah. And so we have that. And kind of on a minor note after this, the word bearers are looking at the surrounding area to find survivors, which they would have expected to find. Mm-hmm. And they find a group of survivors, including Cyrene, who we met in the first part of the book.
Yes.
And she really, at this point, becomes a very important part of the story. I mean, she's got all these wounds that are infected, and she's gaunt and dehydrated. She's almost dead. And literally, again, this tone piece, you see Argel Tal, like this huge space marine, gently pick her up and hold her in his arms and carry her. And you're going, wow. Like, after all that just happened to him, he's still willing to be human in that way.
Of course, yeah.
And I thought that was really powerful. And listeners, you're going to find that this is the beginning of a very intimate, not in any physical way, very intimate relationship between Cyrene and Argel Tal. I think in a lot of ways, Doug, she becomes his real connection to humanity.
Oh, yes.
He just clings to that.
And very much a symbol of what they lost. I mean...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Agreed.
Let's see. I think... Oh, one thing I did want to touch on is very briefly. If you remember back in False Gods, I believe...
Okay.
There's a moment where Horus is injured and all of his little coterie are like, we can't let everyone see him all beat up and sad. And they're kind of a bit of a vanity there. Well, switch to this. Lorgar had to bow like everybody else did, and it said that he was the last one to stand. Like he just couldn't get up. He was broken. The dude broke his religion and his belief system and his life and everything. And it's just an interesting counterpoint that, like, as we're seeing, all the bravado of the Lunar Wolves who become sons of Horus, here we have, like, their Primarch on the Word-Bearer side he let himself show humility and humanity, and I thought that was an interesting just choice. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean anything grand, but I thought it was a great depiction of how they chose to act differently.
Yeah, and when you bring that up with him not being able to get up, I think another minor note is of note is that Argel Tal was one of the two Space Marines who actually lifted his Primarch back onto his feet.
Yes.
And Lorgar remembers that.
Yep.
That was very important to him as the story moves on, that Argel Tal was there for him. So.
Yep.
Okay, so shall we move on to 4716?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is they have a new mission. They have a new.
I think this is 3 years later.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we're moving in 40-year blocks.
Okay.
Yeah, I think isn't that right?
I think this one is 3.
3 years.
It's
Okay,
it's pretty close.
Right, a
Yep.
little bit. Yeah, the next one's 40 years.
Yep.
So we're moving on to the planet 4716, and the Legion is going to be putting them into compliance. And Lorgar wants this planet specifically to be kind of a cleansing and fire and a redemption for the Legion. That's what he wants this to be. He wants it to be quick. He wants it to be thorough. And one of the things that we see here is that Cyrene has become a real confidant to Argal Tal. He will go to her constantly just to talk and just to kind of unload, almost like a therapist.
Yes,
and
yes.
She receives a very specific role in the Legion, but so he's recalling all the events on 4716 to Cyrene, so we kind of hear it through their words. And one of the interesting thing here is we're introduced to something called the Carthage Cohort.
Yes.
And it's a group of Mechanicum units that are a very integral part of the Word Bearers. There's several Mechanicum units spread out through the fleet, but the Carthage Cohort is the one that's assigned to Argal Tal's chapter, the Serrated Sons. And basically, these are all robots that walk, like man-type robots. And one of the robots I think is really cool. His name is Incarnadine, and he is basically a Castellan, if you can picture that from 40K. That's what this kind of looks like. And these robots are such an integral part of the Legion that some of them have actually been accepted as honorary members of the Legion and are treated as equals by the Space Marines. And Incarnadine is one of them. And the unit's led by a tech priest. His name is Xenu 73. Typical Mechanicum tech priest, But one of the things is Incarnadine is in a lot of scenes. He doesn't do much until near the end of the book, but he's always there. He's always standing guard.
Yep.
He's always just waiting for something to happen. And it was really cool to see them fight, because on this planet, the cohort fought, and just a cool, I think, element that he added to the story.
It was a way to splash in other factions for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And we're not going to talk about the specifics, I don't think, of the compliance. There's some interesting pieces to it. There's something they call artificials and some other things going on, but compliance is achieved in the end.
Yep.
And so Lorgar arrives planetside. He's joined by, as always, Corferon and Erebus now. They are his, kind of his, I don't know what you want to call it, but they're always there with him.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I thought was really interesting, Doug, was the assembled Legion. Their Primarch arrives. They all drop to their knees out of abeyance to him. And he was like, "We're done kneeling. Stand up."
Exactly.
Don't kneel to me. We're done with that. And I thought that was such a great moment. And it must have been such a great feeling for those 100,000 Marines. Like,
yep, okay, we don't do this anymore.
We're better than this. And that was really, really cool. It was interesting, too, that there's a group of custodians, because what they did was they broke them up into like 4 different groups, so 20. And there's 5 of them who are with this particular fleet that Argal Tal's part about. And they're led by a custodian named Aquilon. And they've kind of assisted in the compliance operations, so they're there on the ground. And Lorgar asks that they head back to the ship because he has a message for his sons, and just his sons.
Right.
And it's just, I thought the conversation between Aquilon and Lorgar was kind of funny, how they're both trying to be respectful and, maintain decorum. But finally, and Aquilon won't leave.
Yeah.
And finally, Lorgar, and I have to read this quote for you listeners because this is great.
Yes.
Lorgar says to Aquilon and all his custodians, "You are a flock of genetic toys, pieced together in a laboratory from piles of biological scrap. You are so far beneath me, I wouldn't piss on your bodies even if you were aflame." And then, after, it's so awesome. And then he simply says 2 words. He says, Corferon. And Corferon orders the entire Legion to point their bolters at the Custodes.
Yep.
Like,
they in trouble.
We are done with you. That was what that was. And of course, the Custodes are like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they leave. And just a wonderful scene. That entire scene with him and his Legion, Lorgar and the Word Bearers, was amazing. And it really was redemption, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I would say it was also the turning point when it's like, no, you know what, we're done being beat up on. No more shame. You don't kneel. And then also, he's like, I want to talk to my sons. We're gonna be here. No, I'm talking to my sons. And then just like, a whole line of soldiers points up, and it's like, technically no lines were crossed, but I think we get the sense that between Aquilin and Lorgar, they're trying to keep that decorum and see which one of them will break first and be like, this is what I want, so the other can report on them. Yeah. And so it ended up being Lorgar, and he got what he wanted. I like it.
Yeah. And of course, to your point, who could report on who? Look, Custodians can go back to the ship and send a message back to Terra saying this just happened.
Yeah.
If they want.
But again, treachery's not happening yet. So no one would accuse him of being a traitor. It's just Lorgar's being a pill.
Yeah. And the Emperor probably be like, whatever. Yeah. That's Lorgar. So the Custodians do leave, and Lorgar tells his Legion that they're returning to their home planet of Colchis.
Yep.
And some important things happen here, and again, in terms of tone and in terms of some meetings that take place. So the Word Bearers go back home, and they bring with them, interestingly enough, this small group of survivors, including Cyrene, to Colchis, and they become celebrities, which is really interesting.
Yep.
And they're literally their parades now that are going to be held in honor of these pilgrims who have survived the destruction of Kor. And Cyrene actually gets people start calling her the Blessed Lady, and she doesn't know what to make of any of this. It's so fun to see her reaction to it all, remembering she's blind, for all this.
Yep.
It was just wonderful to see that. And the survivors are kind of escorted by the serrated sons, again, Argotal and Torgal and Zaphon and all those, to their special quarters. And here again, you see this humanity of the 17th Legion, where one of the Marines actually calls her Little Mistress. I think it's Torgal has a nickname for her. Mm-hmm. Zaphon calls her Shulasha, which was kind of the monarchian term for her role, as a companion. Yeah. But they're using very intimate names, very familiar names with her, and that was cool. And then the thing I thought was amazing was, as the Marines are walking along, their armor is just coated with these oath scrolls, and it was a tradition that they would roll these up and they would hand them to just common people on the side of the parade route. And there's a mother who's holding a baby that I think Argotal handed one to, and some old man who could barely walk gets another, and you're just like, these Marines are just freaking amazing. You almost just wanted to be maudlin, just seeing the way they treated people. As opposed to the way you kind of think about Space Marines treating human beings. It was really cool. I love that part of the story. So while this is taking place, though, Lorgar comes back to there's like a big building it's called the City of Gray Flowers. The moonflower, I guess, the moon lily is their kind of symbolic flower. And he's met by Magnus. Magnus is waiting for him when he gets back. So why don't you talk to us about their conversation and what happens?
With, what's her name?
With Magnus.
Yes. So essentially Magnus if you don't recall, we kind of touched on him before, is incredibly powerful psyker. Like he understands and navigates the warp like his brothers can't. And so as the news of what's going on with Lorgar and his legion is reaching other fleets and what's happening, it's all just rumors. It's hot goss among Space Marine, I'm sure, right. Legions. But as it reaches him, like, Lorgar is asking questions like, this happened to me. First of all, why did this happen? And secondly, like, if is it true that the Emperor is not a god? If not, what is he in the greater context of the warp? Like, if there's something bigger than him, what is it? I mean, I think that's kind of the question, really. Mm-hmm. And essentially just asks, are there other powers out there? And what is the nature of the warp? And Magnus is very hesitant. You can see he's being very dodgy. He's like, well, there's not like people in there. It's like, what does that mean? Well, it's not like they have like calendars. What are you talking about, man? Like, and we know as readers, if you know much about the background for the other legions, like, Magnus has already made a deal with powers unknown hitherto. He lost his eye because of it. And so it's like, there's a lot of things going on that Magnus could provide context for, but doesn't. And lets Lorgar figure this stuff out on his own, blind. He doesn't have the connection with the warp that Magnus does. And it just ends up kind of being a disaster, to be honest.
Yep. Yeah. For sure. Yeah, it's just the things that Magnus was saying, like, you're trying to force a question. You're trying to force an answer into a question that shouldn't be asked, kind of a thing. And just don't go there.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It's not important. You just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating conversation, though, and an important part of the story, I think.
No, it was, because this is the part that I touch on when I say, like, I love the word bearers for what they represent, and is that human capacity of, like, if not this, then what? Like, and we just need ways to make sense of our very chaotic world. And so, again, Lorgar is still a very broken person. And so, he's reaching out to his brother to be like, you've seen so much more than me. What's out there? And instead of arming him with knowledge, Magnus is like, I don't know, but you probably shouldn't go looking. Definitely shouldn't go looking. Probably bad.
In the emotional part that we talk, Lorgar is literally pleading. He's begging. Mm-hmm. You can just feel the intonation changing in his voice. He's desperate.
Yeah.
And that desperation comes out in his words and in the conversation again. And I think the conversation, to me, if nothing else, it motivated Lorgar even more to look for answers. And it just forced him farther into his obsession,
Absolutely.
Sad, but so that goes on, and then later there's a small piece but important that Cyrene's brought before Lorgar, and that's really a beautiful little part of the story. And he appoints her as a confessor to his sons, to all of the word bearers. So she's now a permanent part of the 17th Legion, and confessors are really pretty high up important, especially in a legion that's kind of, quote, religious like this. Mm-hmm. It's really, really important. And, obviously she accepts the role, and it was really cool that that's where she ended up.
Yeah. Yeah. She essentially had the same role as some of the characters from the first three books, like the recorders or historians that were along, and the Space Marines would go to them for like insight or a little bit of moral guidance, and she just kind of took all those roles in one. It was just like, yep, I know what to do.
That is so cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anything else about this meeting and what was going on when they went back to Colchis?
Is there something specific you want me to talk about? I don't think so.
Whatever else you think. Is there anything else you think is pertinent?
No, I really like the sympathetic descriptions of everybody. Like, you might ask yourself, well, how in the heck did she become a confessor or the Blessed Lady? But it's like, those same things happen in the Imperium not long after this, when women start getting blown up and they become martyrs, and then all of a sudden we have Sisters of Battle, which is a whole thing that's built on martyrdom, bearing the scars of the Great Fight, which now Cyrene is 10,000 years before. Like, it just seems that the path of worship, I don't know, both connecting humanity and also rotting it from the inside within the word bearers is just a prequel to what happens to the Imperium as a whole.
Yeah, and in your point, we've discussed Ephrata Keeler.
Yes.
On the other side, on the Imperial side, and same thing. She was just a person, just a young woman, and look what she became. So, it happened on both sides for sure. So, awesome. Shall we move on to the primordial truth?
Let's do it.
Okay, so now we're moving 40 years later. This is the 40-year thing here, and this part of this is what I loved about the way Aaron wrote the book. But we're kind of starting this part. It's a start, but it begins with an ending. So what we see is a scene where this group of serrated sons, and almost everybody except Argyle just lies dead. They're inside of a spaceship, and this compartment is just full of dead Space Marines.
Yep.
And they're all dead or dying, at least around Argyle, and he's confronted. There's this huge, hideous demon named Ingefell. It's like a worm and a snake and an insect, and just horrific. And this thing just kills him. It kills him very easily. It doesn't even have to think about it. He's dead. And he wakes up. And all of a sudden he finds the rest of his serrated sons and Zaphon all doing the same. They're just kind of waking up. And they're like, where's the demon? Where's Ingefell? What's going on? They just wake up. And they find themselves on this ship. It's called the Orpheus Lament. The entire human crew is dead. And they're inside what will become, known as the Eye of Terror.
Yes.
But it's like this has all happened at the beginning of this section of the book. The ship is severely damaged, no warp travel essentially. Argyle orders the ship to return to the fleet, in other words, to leave the Eye, because they're just in the midst of this warp energy. And the funny thing is, you're going like, well, you have all these questions that you're asking when you're reading this, like, how did this demon get inside the ship? What happened to the the Geller fields? Why is everybody dead? All this did was make you ask like 50 questions.
Yep.
And so they get back to the fleet, and out of the 100 word bearers who were originally on the ship as it was deployed, there's only 38 left. So 2/3 of them had died, and the ones who were alive have had to turn to cannibalism. They've had to eat their fellow word bearers. They've had to eat these desiccated bodies. If you can imagine, and I know it's hard to believe, but these are gaunt, they're dehydrated, and the weirdest thing is they get back to the fleet, and they make contact with the De Profundis, which is the ship that Lorgar's on, and 7 months of time have passed in the Orpheus Lament since they were going to find out why they were where they were, why they ended up with this demon, all that. But only 1 minute has passed in real space. Just so bizarre. And when they make contact with the De Profundis, Argyle literally says that the Eye of Terror is the place where gods and mortals meet. And this was a big thing throughout the earlier parts of the book. Lorgar wanted to find a place because it was in Colchizian lore and all those things where gods and mortals meet. Well, they found it.
Yes.
So once aboard the De Profundis, Lorgar goes to Argyle basically in his little, in the apothecarian. He has a bunch of books and inks and quills, and he says, tell me everything that has happened. And one of the most, and you kind of lose it as you're listening or reading, but he looks in Argyltal's eyes. This is the Primarch looking right at him. He says, Argyltal, you have two souls. Like,
Oh,
wow.
dang. Yeah. Yep. Something ain't right.
Oh my gosh, Doug, all that stuff. And like, you want and you get the answers to all your questions, but man, it was just almost too much. Like, you had so many questions from just this short part of the book. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, exactly. And this whole thing is just Lorgar trying to find God, but he keeps sending his best men like into the mouth of hell. Go find God for me, which is just a fun little.
Oh, and here, you talked about that. This is where you understand a dark side of Lorgar, in that he is willing to sacrifice literally anything or anyone in order to find his answers.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's a zealot without a religion at this point.
Yeah, including his own sons, who he acts, like, I treasure these people. They are family to me. They're so important. Well, maybe not. So, okay. So that's the beginning.
Right.
That's kind of the end of the story, but the beginning. So now we arrive back. We're kind of flying back in time before all these things we just talked about. And we arrive on the 8th planet. I thought that was an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
Brought into compliance by the 17th Legion in the last 3 years that they've been going around this 40-year time span.
Yep.
And the planet is really, really close to a massive warp storm.
Yes.
Which is the Eye, essentially. And the Master of Astropaths, his name is Delvia,
Mm-hmm.
he tells Lorgar that it is screaming. This warp storm is absolutely screaming, and it is the warp storm. It's not just a warp, it is the warp storm that he has ever seen. And he also tells Lorgar that something on the planet is screaming even louder than the storm. And Lorgar kind of looks at him and says, well, you know what? I'm hearing voices, and they're calling my name.
Through the void of space. That's not good. Like, don't answer
that. No. So we make planetfall on this planet, which is such a great reveal here. The word bearers are accompanied by Vendetta, who is one of the custodians. Lorgar is going down here. And you've got Argyltal, Zaphon, the chaplain, and maybe, I don't know, about half a dozen of the serrated sons all go down with Lorgar.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and again, you have this custodian, because Aquilon wanted him to go along to make sure that, he sees what's going on. And Lorgar meets with a young woman, and the people they meet here are very tribal, very, very tribal. You almost picture them as prehistoric people, just wearing loincloths and leather skins and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Very, very primitive. But one of the things they notice is that there are Colchizian. By the way, they're speaking Colchizian to Lorgar.
Yep.
It is like, what? Because Vendetta can't understand this. The custodian's like, is he speaking Colchizian? Yeah. And there are Colchizian runes everywhere. They're on her body. They're just all over the place. And she says to Lorgar, we've been waiting for you for a long time.
Where you been, bro?
Yeah. And you're the favored son of the true Pantheon. He's going, what? The true Pantheon? Well, we know, of course, because we're all well informed. We know this is the 4 chaos gods. So, which don't exist, by the way. And he's hearing these things, and you could almost, Doug, just feel him. It's almost like a drug to him now. Like, this is just making him more and more obsessed and more crazy the more of this stuff he hears, because it's exactly what he wants to hear.
Yeah, I mean, not only do gods exist, but you are their favorite.
Oh, and she says that her name is Ingefell. Ooh, we just heard that name. Yep. Her name is Ingefell the Chosen, and she's soon to be Ingefell the Ascended. Now, here's the giant reveal. This planet's name is Cadia.
Yeah, nerds.
When I read that the first time, it was like, oh my God, Cadia?
Yep.
No. But then you think about it, it's like, well, yeah, that's
It's the gate
exactly
to
where
hell.
Cadia would be. And oh my gosh, it was so cool. It was so cool the way they brought it into the heresy,
Yep.
and made that connection. So they literally spend weeks listening to the Cadians,
Hmm.
researching their writings because their writings all over these cave walls or just with caves.
Yeah, and keep in mind
And
what they're describing is that language and like history
mm,
moved planet to planet across the universe before faster than light travel. So like it's crazy that they can speak Colchis.
yes, and
Sorry, just want to point that out.
this just reinforces what you just said. This just reinforces the whole point that they didn't have space travel. So what was able to allow them to do that? Well, the implication is it was these gods,
Absolutely.
that did this. Yeah.
And if we went to Mars and there's just a guy sitting out there with a cup of tea, he's just like, "G'day, governor," speaking with a British accent, like
Right.
they do in Star Wars, apparently. Where you're just like, "I don't get this, but it feels evil."
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't know what the dark side is, but I know it's not good. Whatever that is.
You guys
Right.
took colonialism way too far.
Yes. Yeah. So again, weeks and weeks listening, researching, and finally Lorgar Vendata and the rest of the word bearers that are there, Argyltal and his guys, they're asked to attend a ritual. And at the center of this ritual is Ingefell, all painted up with Colchizian constellations.
Hmm.
She has a serrated sun on her torso, which is really interesting that she picked that particular symbol. And there are 10 spears. Like, you kind of get the Vlad the Impaler thing kind of pictured here. But there are 10 spears, and 9 of them have tribesmen impaled on them. And Ingefell says to Lorgar, you have to choose the 10th sacrifice. Well, okay, but we kind of forgot the custodian in the corner here.
Yeah.
You think about a custodian, he's seeing this barbarian ritual going on. It's just so anti-emperor, anti-imperial truth. This is total treason. This is just horrific because Lorgar's letting this go on. He won't stop it, and Vendata keeps telling him, stop this thing. And even Argyltal is like, are you going to let this go on?
Yeah.
Like, Argyltal is even in disbelief that this is happening. And Vendata accuses Lorgar of treason, and he's going to try to teleport back to the ship to warn Aquilon. Well, that's not happening because they blocked the signal. They knew what was going to happen, Lorgar and his guys. So Vendata just knows he's done. He can't leave. So he wants to just do as much as he can. He's not stupid enough to attack Lorgar because that won't work. So he kills several of the word bearers. And Zaphon and Argyltal are not going to tolerate them, him just killing their brothers. So he's shot by Zaphon several times, like in the face. And then Argyltal goes over to finish him off with his swords. And Ven was a friend. This isn't something he wanted to do.
No, of course, yeah.
And you could just see Lorgar. You can picture him just standing there like, okay, I'm just going to let this go on because I'm cool with this. It doesn't matter. The interesting thing I thought was, first of all, we know Vendata is going to be the 10th sacrifice, but Argyltal still can't believe what's going on. He can't believe he actually killed a custodian. And he tries to shield Ven's body. He doesn't want him to be the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Lorgar says to him, you move out of the way. This is Argyltal. This is the guy that lifted him up off the ground on Kor. This is a guy who he's made a chapter master. He says, if you don't move out of the way, I will kill you.
Yep.
This again, perfect evidence. It doesn't matter what he has to sacrifice to find his truth.
Yeah. And it puts all of his relationships in perspective. Argyltal now realizes, like, I mean nothing compared to Lorgar's search. Like, it's not even he doesn't even understand enough to be devout to whatever these creatures are. It's literally just the clue of where to go next. He is higher than rank than his own sons.
Yeah,
It's like messed up.
It's just so screwed up. And again, here's that tone piece where Argol Tal is actually defending the body of a almost dead custodian. As the ritual concludes now, because they have the 10th sacrifice, they impale Vendetta on this thing while he's still alive. It's just horrific. Ingefell, the young woman, kind of rises into the air. You can just kind of picture this. This is such a meme,
Yes.
She's kind of floating in the air, and all of a sudden, just huge chunks of skin just get ripped off her body by some unseen forces. And there's just this mound of flesh lying on the ground.
Yep.
And this demon Ingefell that we talked about earlier rises, this snake-like, worm-like insect thing. And it's just absolutely a hideous countenance. It's just horrible. And it speaks to Lorgar. It's like, I know, I'm meant to talk to this guy. He said that he was sent by one of the gods that Lorgar's looking for.
Yep.
Lorgar, again, this is just feeding him. He's just like he's doing coke or something, man. He's just like, more, right?
Yep. Yes, they got him on the hook.
Oh my God, yeah. And he tells Lorgar that he'll need his sons, and if you give me your sons, I'll guide them into the Eye of Terror. And Lorgar says, "Will you hurt my sons?" And he's like, "Yeah." And Lorgar is like, "Okay."
Yep. Is this going to end poorly? Yes, it will. Okay.
For everybody but Lorgar. So they go into this kind of private conversation, Lorgar and Ingefell, and Lorgar comes out and says, "We're doing this," and so they figure out a ship they're going to use. It's a very slim attack aircraft used for scouting and exploration. It's called the Orpheo's Lament. Has 1,000 human crew. They're going to put 100 Space Marines. And Ingefell, this demon, is coming on board the ship. That we're not going to talk specifics, but that is just wild to see what happens when this demon comes on board the ship and what happens to the human crew and crazy stuff.
This is all backfill for what happened earlier, right? No, never mind.
Yeah, this leads us up to that specific moment. So during the journey to the Eye, it's really interesting that Ingefell shows Argol Tal two very important things. First of all, he shows him and the other serrated sons the fall of the Eldar and the creation of the Eye of Terror when Slaanesh was created.
Yep.
That's what happened, and they're all like, "Oh my gosh, there's a real God, and this is what, the Xenos race died." And then more interesting though, and this for me was so formative when I came to understand the whole 40K, 30K universe. He takes them to a laboratory. So it's a gene laboratory. It's full of these embryonic cells, and they contain the 20 Primarchs.
Yeah.
20, by the way, not 18, because we haven't done anything with the 2nd and the 11th yet. And there's little Roman numerals on them, and they see Gilliman's pod, and they're just like, every one of them just almost reaches for their weapon, like, now's the time we can kill this mother, right? You just know they want to do this guy in.
Yep.
But more importantly, each one of these pods is hooked into a bigger machine, but it has a little generator on it, and it turns out it's a Geller field generator. Now, Doug, why do you have Geller fields?
Well, Dan, you have Geller fields to keep the warp out.
Oh, well, but wait a minute. If the Emperor didn't know about the warp, then why would he have Geller fields on his little birthing pods? That makes no sense.
It's almost like it's a gigantic lie.
Oh my gosh, man. So revealing. So the Emperor not only knows of, but it turns out he's dealt with the gods in order to get the knowledge he needs to make the Primarchs.
Yeah.
And when they come for payment, here's the thing. So Argol Tal, so they come for payment. They're like, we're going to get these guys, but they can't because there's Geller fields. Well, Argotal, even though this is like a vision, it's hard to understand, I think, as you're listening or reading, that there's a way they can interact with this vision. And he takes out his two, red iron swords, and he disables the Gellerfield. So as soon as that happens, all these embryonic cells just boom, all of a sudden they're launched out and into the universe. And it's really interesting how Aaron writes about the arrival of each one of these cells, which we know is a Primarch, on each one of the planets where they were found. Like, one of them talks about this thing arrived in a forest, and you kind of think that might be Lionel Johnson. And there's another one where that it's probably Kurz, but it's just so cool because he'll go and then he'll describe another one and he goes. It's really a cool tour of what's happening with these Primarchs. But the bottom line is they know that everything the Emperor has told, and the Imperium itself, is built on a lie.
Now, question for you.
Yes.
Do you think that sequence of events actually happened?
Yes, I believe it did.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, I'm actually not so sure, because they don't have to, like, the forces of chaos don't have to actually have proof. They just have to make the word bearers believe the story. And in this story about gods and deals gone wrong, the Emperor is painted very poorly. The Chaos Gods painted very honorably, right? We made a deal, of course. You got to honor it.
Sure.
And then the word bearers are put multiple times as the hero of the story, which for people who have a deep faith and believe that they are the zealots who carry the word is very appealing and very enticing.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it's like, man, they are the martyrs and the heroes of the story. And, maybe it didn't need to literally be Argotal smashing the Gellerfields. It could have been. I mean, obviously something happened to them. I'm just as happy to believe it is.
Right.
But having the word bearers feel like they are taking control and doing what's right is more important. And that was an act of, I don't know, rebellion. And even if it was just division, it's in them.
There's two reasons I believe. One being that I cheated and I read the book Valdor.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. So that's one reason I believe it. The second reason I believe it is that Ingefell warns them many times, because he's there, he's providing the vision. Right. Do not interact with this. Do not let them know you're here. Do not. He warned them like a bazillion times, don't interact. So they had a choice to interact with this. So if they had chosen not to, to your point, he probably knew they were going to interact, but they could have chosen not to, and then the vision would have been just what the vision was. So that's why I guess I believe more that it happened, not that it didn't. So that scene happens in the lab. The Primarchs are launched, and we're taken back to the Orpheus of Lament then, and now they're in the Eye. They've gotten there. And Ingefell now asks Argotal to take a leap of faith and drop the Gellerfields for the ship. Well, he knows what's going to happen. I mean,
yes,
he knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. He just dropped a Gellerfield on like 20 Primarch babies and is just like, yes, you're going to be taken to a whimsical, fun adventure in the forest. Is that really what you think is going to happen right now?
And in the end, he drops the Gellerfields because he's got to find the answers for Lorgar. And literally all 1,000 of the crew are just slaughtered. And Ingefell kills the word bearers one at a time, which takes us back to the beginning of the chapter, which is that scene where Ingefell kills Argotal. They all wake up. That's kind of where we're back to now.
Yep.
So Argotal has been telling Lorgar all these things. And one of the things that Lorgar says is we're going to commit genocide on Cadia because we can't, have these people or any evidence of what we've done here. I mean,
of course,
what we've done is absolutely, traitorous. That is traitorous. He crossed the line there. And the other thing that they talk about is Argothal's possession, because part of what we find is all of the Space Marines who survived have a new friend.
Yep.
Let's put it that way.
Yep.
And then when they're finished talking, he goes to Cyrene, of course, to confess. And he interestingly says he'll defend humanity, but he's not going to defend the Imperium anymore because it's based on lies.
Yes.
And this is where he speaks of the heresy to her, bringing the other legions into the revelations of the primordial truth. And she's listening to all this, and she's just great. She just listens. She doesn't react, which is really kind of cool, I think. I think two things here. So that happens. The other thing, I think there's two other items in this part of the book that are of note. First of all, Argotal and Aquilon, they've been together for like 40 years or 80 years now, I guess, by this time.
Right.
And they've become friends, as much friends as they could be. And so they spar a lot, and practice, do the practice cage thing. And so Argotal and Aquilon are sparring, which is really interesting because for the first time ever, Argotal actually beats Aquilon.
Yes.
Like, whoa, what's going on? Why is this happening, right? We kind of know, but and the other thing is Aquilon asks Argotal about Vendata's death, and of course Argotal creates this amazing story of Vendata's heroism and the heroism of the other Marines who died, and all that he did to save Vendata and all those kind of things. So interesting conversation, and I think it's an important one because Aquilon believes his friend, but it's I think he says something about to the other custodians that Argotal is the only word bearer that he believes.
Yes.
So he kind of took the pressure off, I think, from that perspective. Argotal did. The second thing, which is really interesting, is Argotal is promoted to chapter master by Lorgar, and what's a small thing, but I think very important, is when they come to the ceremony, he and Zaphon, for the very first time, are dressed in crimson and black armor.
Yes. Yep. And this is the turn.
Yep. They are not in gray anymore. And that's really important. A very important little thing that he writes into the story. And the survivors of the Orpheo's Lament, which is about 40 of them now, they're formed into a unit known as the Gal Vorbak, and I think in Colchizian that was something like Blessed Sons or Blessed Sons.
I believe
like
so,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, but they're called the Gal Vorbak. And Lorgar has made it very clear that their possessed nature is to remain secret until the right time. So that is that part of the story. Any other thoughts or comments?
No, I mean, this is the introduction of one of the nastiest units in the 40K game, or 30K game. The Galvar Bach are living tanks because nothing like them exists for quite a while.
Yes.
And they're so cool. They're so stinking cool.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all. That's my note.
Okay. No, that's
cool.
Great.
Things are cool.
And now we're going to jump, again, 40 years.
Yep.
After the events in the Eye of Terror. And Zaphon's been away from the fleet for a few years, and what he's been doing is cultivating, we've talked about these in the other books, the warrior lodges. And he is a chaplain. He's gone to the Iron Warriors specifically, and he tells Argotal of the progress they've made. Like there's hundreds and hundreds now of these lodges throughout the other chapters, like the Iron Warriors and the other ones that are going to turn. And just really, really happy with the progress they've made. So that was an interesting conversation because it's part of the whole, how the heresy spread. It was these word-bearer chaplains, and there were many, many chaplains. Zaphon is the only one who went to these other legions during this 40 years and started planting these lodges and the heresy that was kind of gestating inside of them. But to hear it from one of the chaplains, kind of how the mechanics of it was working, was, I thought, kind of interesting. So
Yeah.
the other thing that happens, and it's just kind of a brief diversion here, the Serrated Sun chapter, and they're really big. They've been remanned, as it were.
Yep.
They make war on a non-compliant human world, and Argotal and Aquilon fight side by side, which you really haven't seen much before, because, and after so many years of sparring together, they're really, really good working together. There's a grudging respect, and you see that. That he, again, considers Aquilon a friend, but you see that in this part of the story, which is really interesting. And as the battle ends, though, the news reaches the fleet that Horus is now leading a rebellion against the Emperor.
Mm-hmm.
And, all heads turn, all attention turns to that specific thing that's going on.
Absolutely.
One minor character, because we need, it's not in the notes per se, but I think we need to talk about it, which is interesting, is we're introduced to a imagist. I think his name is Kadim, and something that we're introduced to him in this part of the book with this compliance. He goes down to the planet and so forth. It's kind of a minor thing, but something happens on one of the ships that he discovers something and takes a picture of it, and it's really important because one of the things that Zaphen has told Argeltal is you need to work with the rituals I'm going to teach you, because Aquilon and the custodians can't be communicating with Terra. And I have a way for you to stop that from happening.
Yes.
And this way it's kind of in the background, but it's really important when you think about it. Because if the custodians had been able to report on everything that was going on, the Emperor would have known about this long before he did. But there's something happening on one of the ships that we're going to talk about in a minute. But very, very interesting, and I have some commentary on it. So anyway.
Yeah.
So we're done with that planet, and that's done. The word bearers then gather on Isfahan 5. We're on Isfahan 5 now. This is after Isfahan 3, which we've talked about. And we've got the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, and the Alpha Legion who have joined the word bearers. So we got 4 legions that are going to turn traitor. And they all meet aboard the Fidelitas Lex, which is a word bearer ship. And the Primarchs kind of brief their captains on what's going on the surface. You get the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard. You've got Horus's Rebel legions, and of course the 3 legions on the ground are like, we're getting 4 legions of reinforcements. We're going to just kick these guys' butts. And I thought it was really telling. Again, there's these little things that Aaron Doug brings into the story, just like the quote from Lorgar to the custodians. And Sevatar, who most people know as the first captain of the Night Lords, he utters some words kind of like, Argotal and Zaphen coming in for the first time in the Crimson and Black. We, at least for the first time that we know, Sevatar is the first person to ever say the words, "Death to the false emperor." All these other captains and officers and all these other Space Marines, like hundreds of them, are shouting "Death to the false emperor." You just picture what that's like. And Argotal's, he has a demon. He's been possessed. We know this. And the symbiotic demon has a name. It's called Rom.
Yeah,
and
I like that name.
Talking to him. He actually starts having conversations with himself, right? And Rom is explaining how this is supposed to work, because, it's a new thing for Argotal. He's never been possessed before. He doesn't know what to do. And so at this point, they're about to obviously go down to the surface. The 4 second wave legions, which just talked about, touchdown in Isfahan 4. They fortify the drop site, and there's some really interesting descriptions of how the Iron Hands are fortifying their part of the battle line. It is so cool to just read that. It is so Iron Hands, just steel walls, emplacements, this, that. It just goes down perfectly and really quickly. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, of course, Argotal and the Gal Vorbak are at the forefront of the word bearers, part of the lines, and they're met by some retreating Raven Guard. And this part of the story is just, I don't care which side you're on. This is just so sad.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and here again, he's still, even though he's possessed by a demon, he hasn't lost his humanity. He's thinking about his family. He's thinking his human family, long dead. He's
Yep.
thinking about the changes he's undergone. He's thinking about the day he was recruited by Erebus, and he actually asks his family for forgiveness, and then gives the order to open fire on these Raven Guard.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, just hell is unleashed, is it not?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, we should definitely do a video about the drop site massacre and how that all played out.
Yes.
It gives a little context to this, but essentially, like, 3 legions got there early, went to go heretic hunting after Istvan 3, and then when they came back for resupply is when the other 4 legions, who were at this point supposed to be loyalists, turned, and that's how we have our full complement of Chaos Marines who under Horus. And then and so there is this moment of, like, it's a 2-part betrayal, right? These beleaguered Space Marines, in this case Raven Guard, turning around, realizing that, like, the line that they thought was going to be like, oh, we can rest here, all of a sudden it's just lined up with Galvorbach, who are, like, starting to act weird and they don't look right and something's wrong. If you see the model, you know what I'm talking about. They weren't quite there yet, but it was still hideable. You could still hide it.
Yep.
And then the second those guns go up, it gets real gross. It gets real nasty.
That's when the demons take over.
Yep.
And they just butcher the loyalists. I mean, we see there's some interesting scenes here. First of all, you get Corax, who's the Raven Guard Primarch. He actually attacks the Galvorbach. And he kills like half of them. Corax is amazing. There's just no way he's got to be one of the most fightiest Primarchs, but just slaughters them. And so he's seeing his sons die, and Lorgar confronts him. Well, that isn't going well for Lorgar.
No. Turns out if you're an emotional religious history nerd, you don't do so well against the assassin.
Even with your big fancy mace. So yeah. Corax almost kills him, and then Curse all of a sudden shows up. He's like, hello, Corax, it's me. And Corax is like, what? And then Corax kind of retreats. He falls back because he wants to... He's fighting to preserve his own legion, what's left of it.
Yep.
And it's, protect his sons. And the other thing, Corax kind of retreats, but the other thing we see, and some of the Primarchs are watching this and, like, commentary, it's a sports thing. Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus, who's the head of the Iron Hands, the other loyal legion, are fighting. And it's almost as bad as the Corax Lorgar thing, except that Ferrus Manus is just way outclassed here. It's not that he doesn't have the power, but he just tires because Fulgrim is just this unbelievably... You could just picture these swords just kind of weaving through the air, and he literally decapitates Ferrus Manus, and we see this. And some of the other Primarchs are like, oh, wow, look at that. That was kind of cool. It was horrific. But so Fulgrim, so Fulgrim.
Yes, very much so.
Anyway, back to our story. Daggertall, who is a character we've heard a lot through the story, he's killed. And literally there's just 11 survivors in the Galvorbach. Almost 2/3 of them have been killed in this battle. More than that, like 3/4 when you think about it. 11 out of 38. And so all this is going on the surface. A wonderful, writing by Aaron to describe this horrific battle. And while that's happening, Aquilon and his 3 companions, who are part of the fleet, have been kind of dispersed in order to keep them out of the way. And the captains of the ships they were on had orders to deliberately delay their return, but they get back. And when they board the De Profundis, they see evidence of the word bearer's treachery. Now, why don't you talk about the evidence that they see in this room?
Oh, the evidence, like we've got like ritual stuff. There's like
That thing, that room full of the astropaths who are like glued to the wall, and
yes, yeah. It's essentially like it seems like rituals and like communication in with the demons in 40K is like so intense. Like there's just a way better to do it. So they had like astropaths nailed to the wall. It reminded me of like I don't know, Pirates of the Caribbean, when the people like merge with the ship, like they get jammed inside of it and they're just screaming. And it's meant to basically, this is part of that thing that shuts off communication. And it's just, it's a mess.
And my commentary on this is that when you read this, you're just appalled. This is just hideous that they're using these astropaths, basically allowing demons to possess them to block communications, And there's maybe 50 or 60 of them in this room.
Yep.
And people who read this are going to go, well, that's just horrific, sacrificing these, psychers, and there's 50 or 60 of them. And then I think, okay, I'm not bothered by this at all, because the Emperor literally has 1,000 psychers sacrificed in a single day.
Yeah, this is fine.
This is not a problem. Like, okay, I get it. I understand why they did it. Yeah, and why are you bothered by that? If you're an imperial person, you would be so, I don't know what the word is, just so upset at it, so angry at it. And it's like, really? This bothers you? You have to learn to kind of judge degrees of bad, somehow. It was just it made me laugh almost when the people got so offended by it.
I would agree with that. Yeah, and what's interesting though is they seem to have done like an exceptional job of hiding it, like containing or compartmentalizing.
Yes.
And that's great. I mean, because they got pretty far before the custodes attached to them figured anything out. I mean, they got to the act of heresy. Yeah.
And this was shown to them because this Imagist, that's why he's in the story, really. He had stumbled upon, during an attack on the ship, he'd stumbled upon this compartment and took a picture, and somehow this word got back to the word bearers, and Aquilon saw this and they were like, okay, they're just wrathful now. They know that the word bearers had just completely gone off the rails.
Yep.
And the first person that Aquilon, of course, knows about Cyrene, he's like, well, she knows everything. She's been their confessor for a bazillion years. And actually, when you think about it, Cyrene's probably about 100 years old by now.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. So they head straight for her. And what was really cool, though, was when they opened the door and force it open, Incarnadine, that huge Castellan robot, is just standing there. And it was like, yeah, buddy, go tear these guys up. Well, he killed one of them. But
yeah, custodes are like super good. I mean, this is not like a dishonorable fight at all. He put some work in.
He did. And actually killing a custodes, it's like, that's pretty good work, buddy. But he gets destroyed by them. Aquilon murders Cyrene.
Yes.
She's almost dead. And then they rush off. Well, Argotal goes straight to her when he comes back to the ship. And this is just... It is like a Greek tragic scene. You see this young woman who was in his arms like 100 years before, 80 years before, almost dead. And now all of a sudden she's almost dead in his arms again. And you can just see the humanity leach out of him as he just mourns for the loss of this young woman who was so important to who he was as a person, really. And it was just so sad. It was almost a maudlin moment when you read this and you realize how close the two of them were.
Yep.
Needless to say, he was absolutely enraged.
Oh, yeah.
Happened here.
This is like the Space Marine version of John Wick's puppy getting shot. Like this.
That's so true. That is perfect. Yeah, and so the custodians, they got to get away because they got to tell people what happened and all this stuff. So they jump at Thunderhawk, try to take it to the planet. They get shot at, and it crash lands on the planet. And the Galvorback, including Argotol, obviously, are going down to hunt them down because they're dead. They're just dead, and they're not going to let them live, no matter if they all die.
Yes.
So there's only, 3 left now, I guess, yeah, because they had 4, and there's 3 on the surface. And the 2 groups engage. And the interesting thing was, I think we should talk about the fighting style piece of this, which is really interesting. So
Please.
On Planet 4716, I think it was Zaphon or Torgal had mentioned to Argotol that there's something wrong with the way these custodians fight. I mean, they were incredibly destructive, but he noticed that they work individually.
Yes.
They don't work as a group. They're really, really powerful as individual warriors, and you have to look at it. So the Galvorback was exactly the opposite because they attack and fight as a pack.
Yes.
And so they used that advantage when they killed these 3 custodians. So one of the custodians basically cuts Malnor to pieces. He's gone. But he's killed by Torgal, which is cool. And then literally Argotol tears off Aquilon's head, which I thought was so great, man. He just it's gone, man.
Pries him open like a can of tuna.
And then sadly, because Zaphon was one of my favorite characters, he was a great guy. The last custodian throws his guardian spear like a weapon, like a ranged weapon, and it just impales Zaphon, and he's killed. And then the remaining Galvorback just jump on him and tear him to pieces. So they're all dead. And the story is almost over now because we finish up. We see Argotol in his meditation chamber. He's not only mourning the loss of Cyrene, of course, but and this is where that human part of him has come back now. Yeah. And he's really mourning the loss of Aquilon and Zaphon.
Yep.
He really misses both of them a great deal. And the funny thing is that Rom, his demon, kind of tries to comfort him, and he says, "Hey, I'm your brother now, man. I know you lost, guys."
Exactly. Yeah. Don't worry about Cyrene, bros before hoes. I got you. I'm in your head.
Yeah, for sure. And then the word we get here is that they're on their way as the word bearers to undertake their retribution against the Ultramarines at a planet called Kauth.
Yes, which is my favorite story.
Oh, amazing. So thoughts overall?
Yeah, okay, so that concludes The First Heretic by Eric Nemsky-Bowden. I think an incredible book. One thing that I would suggest if someone is going to read it, because I do suggest you read it for yourself. Yes. The reason is, instead of other books with a ton of characters where you have to keep track of various storylines, I feel like this one has a lot of characters, but everything that's said to every one of them is meant for us as the reader, to form a picture of what their belief system is like, what their faults are collectively. They get so intensely attached to information, and just as Lorgar has these grandiose acts of faith and belief, he projects that onto his sons, and all of a sudden Argotol is taking a leap of faith by smashing the Geller field, and it's just that constant sins of the father repeating itself kind of a thing, and so they get all in very, very quickly, relatively speaking. I mean, compared to the scope of 40K timelines, 80 years is nothing. And yeah, I thought it was a wonderful depiction of, frankly, like the problems with humanity with post-human warriors, right? Even though the Ultramarines were painted as being very unsympathetic and very cold, that is overall healthier, I would probably say, for something that's like a living demigod of a weapon.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a wonderful book. I love Lorgar. I know everybody, the meme is like, screw Erebus, and it's like, man, they all had a part to play in bringing a tragedy, and the overall tragedy of the heresy is made up of these individual ones their faith got shattered and their people were killed and Cyrene was taken away, and you know what I mean, like all these
Yes.
micro tragedies built into one, and it was just like, oh snap.
Sure.
All because the Emperor's a bad dad.
Yeah, for sure. He's just an idiot. I've said that like 10 times already, but it's true. He's a tyrant and he's an idiot. And there's just more and more, as you read more and more of the books and the stories, evidence that this guy just cares about nothing or no one. It's just his ambition. And as much as on the Imperial side we portray him as a loving father kind of a thing, it's just really, really neat to see this different perspective. The other thing I wanted to say, you made a really good point about that humanity and how we saw, Space Marines, even like the Ultramarines being portrayed the way they were. I think it's funny how in 40K we've come around to the Primaris Marines now. And the way the Primaris are portrayed is much more human than Space Marines have ever been portrayed. I mean,
Yes.
reading some of the stories with them in them, they'll stop, they see a little girl in this destroyed city sitting on the side of the road crying. One of the Primaris picked her up and carried her, and you're going, what?
I know.
When do Space Marines do that? But, and you hear about Primaris Marines reading poetry and doing all these things, you're going, wow, this is really a weird world where we've changed it over like that. But it's just such an excellent book for so many reasons. And I think for me, if I had to rate my top 3 books in the Heresy, this would be among the top 3. I've listened or read that book, I can't tell you how many times now.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree. It's in my top 3. It's probably the least straight up actiony, but all of the scenes that have action, like they're huge. I mean, like the 1,000 people on the ship dying and the Geller field going down, like it's a combat that means something.
Sure.
And all the discussions and stuff give us such great insight into the minds of Space Marines, which is awesome.
Yes, agreed.
So awesome. Well, that is our take of the First Heretic. What do you want to do next, Dan? I'm just going to put you on the spot here. What are we thinking? We can either...
I think that Calth might be the way to go. No fear. I think that might be... I think that's it. No fear.
Yes. I think there's 2 stories, but let's see. No fear is definitely one side of it, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's the invasion of Calth, isn't it?
Yes, it should be.
Okay, so I think that'd be a great follow-up because it would give a totally opposite view of the word bearers and the Ultramarines. It would give a very interesting contrast.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. No Fear
sense?
by Dan Abnett is the next one.
Okay, awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us, everybody, and taking this journey with us. You heard the next book. If you have any questions for us, I know this summer's been kind of crazy and haven't had much of a chance to check the questions. We haven't really had anything, but let me know in the comments down below or wherever you send emails. I have all the stuff in our description about how to hang out with me and Dan on our respective shows. He has Cubic Shenanigans. I'm over here with 2+ Tough. And we just look forward to hanging out with you and seeing you next time.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. And I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming, and the Emperor protects.